This piece is written originally by Naqash Munir. Its title is A Midnight Heckle. It all started abruptly. I and my friend Nomaan Samuel were in a very huge cathedral. It was a mysterious place and unknown time of the day, probably midnight. From corridors and huge staircases, I moved strangely with him when we met the famous singer, Shüfqat Amanat Ali. We are being musically together, so I started sharing a few alaps, and I told Amanat how good Noman is playing at guitar, upon which Shafqat said, "Are you telling me about his guitar skills seriously?" And I nervously replied, "I know you know how good he is." However, we then again faced a few other faces with a strange eye on us. As we moved, we were humming melodies which spread in the cathedral till the very tiny end of my listening without breaking. Met a few other suspicious-looking people when Noman started to walk quickly, and I followed him in some bizarre fear. He entered a large hallway through a heavyweight door where I was almost running. Upon following him and entering the door, a very old, wrinkled-faced lady struck my foot to trip me, which I felt at that moment. I became furious and asked the other 3 to 4 people who was she and why did she trip me. I moved near to her and asked who was the attendant of that place so that lady can be inquired why did she try to make me fall. Nonetheless, that old lady heckled a few words and said, "Véch-ya, khaada," meaning everyone sold, everyone ate. It was the time when I finally woke up from the dream which I watched this morning. I told my wife about it. She told me she struck my foot to wake me up for the office, so that I do not get late. We laughed but learned a lesson about this society. The lady was complaining that everybody is busy in their cycle of living. They sell their horses, eat from it and then sleep without thinking of others. As humans, we must think for others and act positively to add a little satisfaction to their hearts as well. This piece is written originally by Naqash Munir. Its title is A Midnight Heckle. It all started abruptly. I and my friend Nomaan Samuel were in a very huge cathedral. It was a mysterious place and unknown time of the day, probably midnight. From corridors